When I think about this kind of midlife milestone, there are a lot of paradigm shifts in how we actually diagnose, and I'll use that in the medical parlance. Historically, you do your blood work, and if your FSH, which stands for follicle stimulating hormone, is not on the rise, and your estradiol or estrogen levels are not going down, then you're not in menopause. Well, that's out with the wash water. That sadly is still done by many, and that's the dismissal part. Let's say you're 41. Oh, your labs are fine. It's not a lab diagnosis. There's so many things that constitute menopause.
Hello, it's time for the Menopause Collective. We've got Dr. Susan Baumtaertel, all the way fresh from Seattle, and we are moving through menopause. Today's topic, menopause, getting a diagnosis. This is a bit of a minefield, has to be said. Got a couple of different perspectives. June with her kinesiology approach, and Dr. Susan with a medical approach. And me, your host, Philippa. And, I was perimenopausal, not knowing quite what to do with myself, and going to my doctor here in the UK, who kind of, well, yes, it's, this is what's happening. It's that time of life. I might have been offered HRT and at that time been a little bit unsure whether that was a path I wanted to tread along. But really, I think what I'm beginning to understand, the more that I have these conversations, if we have a better understanding of what is happening with our health, then we've got more options to decide how to tackle our health situation. And we know there's so many symptoms. How many is it now? I know it's just getting more every day. 34, a list of 34 symptoms. That can include the mind, the mood, the physical sensations that are going on in our bodies, getting overheated, getting aches and pains in places you didn't used to have them, the genitourinary symptoms that are associated with menopause. So there's this whole host of symptoms. And if we have only 10 minutes with our doctor and we have to pick one, then that's when it starts to go very slightly awry. Susan, let's start with you. A menopause diagnosis. What would you say?
I would kind of drift back to the teenage years for a moment. And I would draw a parallel between puberty and menopause. So when you think about a child that's going through puberty, we kind of know what that is, right? For girls, they're getting their breast buds, maybe they're getting a little acne, they're getting hormonal, God forbid they get a period, and all these things are happening, they're still growing and developing. And it's not a day, it's not a week, it's months, it's probably years. Well, it's not like menopause is puberty backwards, but there's a lot of analogies. There's a time frame, it's months, it's years, sometimes decades. It's a natural journey. We all do it. There's no precise onset, there's no precise end, naturally. Puberty, there kind of is. You kind of move through puberty. You don't do blood work on a kid going through puberty. You know what they're doing. It's pretty obvious. And there are many hallmark signs and symptoms. I don't even categorize 32, 28, 12. It's just anything and everything happens. And so I think that that's the one thing that I like to crystallize is that this is something that shouldn't just be considered like an illness process or, oh gosh, this is horrible. This is absolutely natural. And I use that word in a different way. So when I think about this kind of midlife milestone, there are a lot of paradigm shifts in how we actually diagnose, and I'll use that in the medical parlance. So historically, and honestly, a lot of docs did this. You do your blood work, and if your FSH, which stands for follicle stimulating hormone, is not on the rise, and your estradiol or estrogen levels are not going down, then you're not in menopause. Well, that's out with the wash water. That to me, sadly, is still done by many, and that's the dismissal part. Let's say you're 41. Oh, your labs are fine. It's not a lab diagnosis. There's so many things that kind of constitute menopause. It's a long time frame. And so I think that's important to establish when you're talking about a diagnosis. It's not like we're diagnosing pneumonia, like we better diagnose it, treat it, or you're going to be in trouble. This is a journey. And I think that lends itself to a very different approach in terms of diagnosis.
Okay. Yeah. Jude?
Yeah. Well, I totally agree. And I've seen that with patients of mine who've gone, I'm feeling like I've got to be menopausal. And yet I've gone to the doctor and they said, no, 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 you're fine. And they come back and they go, well, now I'm doubting my own observations. I'm doubting my own intuition. And I'm going, no, 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 you have to trust your intuition. If you feel like you are, then you probably are. But then we can check with the kinesiology and do some muscle testing. But that the other thing, I mean, like you say, this has always been my bother with the hormonal tests because they pick a few, but there's this complicated interrelationship between all of the hormones in the body, including the ones that are in the digestive system, which a lot of people don't really realize that are there. And I think what would be really nice is if we could have a comprehensive assessment on a fairly regular basis. I mean, I know when I grew up in Canada, we used to always have a once a year checkup. Now, I don't know if they're still doing that over there, if they're doing that in the States, but if you know where someone's basic normal benchmark is, then you can tell when they've gone off it. But if you measure them against some random, not even random, it's not random, it's arbitrary even, this is normal, then there's going to be an average, in the middle, but then there's all these people on either side of it and be at very different levels of hormones and still have symptoms because for them, it's a big change. Is that making sense?
Yeah, no, I think that's absolutely right. The range of normal. And that's the thing, isn't it? It's not a spot, it's a range. And some of us will be sitting further down one end or higher up on the spectrum. And so shifts from our normal and not always necessarily demonstrated, as you say, in blood work, but may well be evident in our symptom picture that we perceive.
I would say, and I agree with what June is saying, but I would kind of go a little further out, kind of daringly so, and suggest that, and I'm just speaking really about American culture, where everybody wants a test and they want it yesterday and they want it paid for, they want it free. So if we could get away from testing, that would be a gift to many women because I think often there's nothing wrong with tracking, like especially if you're diabetic and you're watching your glucose and so forth. But it somehow feeds into the, dare I say, neuroticism, this kind of like obsession with, oh, what's my number? Oh, it's a little too high. Oh, it's a little too low. Oh, no wonder that's how I feel bad. Like, let's go back and look at kind of, again, reframing this journey of menopause, the natural process. We don't have to mark everything as a data point. There are definitely good use of lab tests. If you're 62 and you're having periods, there's something fundamentally strange. We need to know what's going on. Maybe need some CAT scans. I mean, if you have bleeding and it's been 2 years after menopause, we call it dysfunctional uterine bleeding. You've got to get that checked out. If you're 38 and you stop your periods, that's early. So there are many different ways, and those are just examples of yes, to dive in, use science, get some data, look at the labs, track things, being very careful. But for the vast majority of women going through menopause, I think that it's almost a disservice to kind of focus on the lab because I treat the patient, not the lab.
Yeah, there is a bit of an obsession over here with getting tests for all sorts of things, scans for this, MRIs, CT scans, all the stuff. They want to know what the machine says. People want to know what the feedback, because I think we've been led so far away from trusting our own instincts that we need to get back to that. Again, totally agree. And I think we need to get back to where people can trust their own judgment and to notice and to know what feels right for them. Then be happy with that and just manage it. And there are ways to manage it. There are loads of lovely ways to manage it.
Yeah, that's true. So this diagnosis, for the most part, is made on a set of symptoms that we might experience, and that is appropriate for the vast majority of people. And so the outliers we've talked about: premature it might be worth getting some investigation, because prematurely being low in estrogen has ramifications in the longer term for our health. So it is important under those circumstances to appreciate what's happening in the body hormonally. And similarly at the other end of the spectrum, but for women who are falling within the, what would be considered that normal time frame to be experiencing a set of symptoms, then the diagnosis is made on the set of symptoms, and that is entirely appropriate. Now, the question comes that once we have that information and we know that we're not too young for it to be happening and we're not too old to be bleeding, it's kind of like, well, then what? We might seek out assistance from a physician to have support as we navigate this journey with symptoms. And so, unfortunately, here our experiences are varied, is what I will say, and probably everywhere in the world. But to have some sort of standard of care that we can live to expect when we feel like we need support and guidance, that we get it. I'm kind of happy with what you say. And I think you're quite right. It is navigating this path between a propensity for wanting answers. I think this is very human of us to feel actually, the unknown really undermines our psyche.
Mm-hmm.
And if we look at fluctuating circumstances in the broadest sense, this really undermines us, and we just don't like it as people. So we have that drive to seek, answers. We want definitive answers. And I guess, a bit like Susan said, Western medicine has got so good at giving us answers in lots of different areas. Now, they're not always, it's not always good for us to know these answers. And I liked what you said, June, in a way about, we don't know what's been happening to us in terms of all these investigations over the years, because obviously what I'm most familiar with is MRI scans and X-ray results. And that's something that people will come waving their MRI results and X-ray scans at me. And so what I know is what we've got is a picture of them on that day, and probably lying down, even not even standing up. So how much we interpret from those results and how that affects us can be profound, actually. And it can go either way. And yet it's the same information. So the same information delivered to hundreds of different people will affect them all slightly differently.
Yeah.
For some, it's so frightening that they go into that place of being too afraid to do anything and move and thinking that they shouldn't move. And then for others, it's a sort of wake-up call, and maybe it's time to take action. And this is where I guess test results are never going to take account of all our individual quirks and, long live individual quirks. But, you just can't legislate for that, can you, is the thing. So actually, kind of in a good way, that menopause is a diagnosis made based on a set of symptoms. It's not necessarily a bad thing that is what happens. And then, of course, the management piece of the puzzle, I think Susan alluded to this, that we are, needless to say, all totally individual. So then the management, needless to say, tailored to the individual needs of that particular person. And so there isn't really one magic pill. This is what we kind of keep coming back.
Exactly. My perspective is always that it's got to be individualized treatment and individualized understanding of a person's whole situation. And I'm going to bring in the word holistic. It's been much overused in some respects because I don't think people have fully grasped what it actually means. But I think certainly our current environment is full of hormone disrupting chemicals. You cannot address the internal condition of someone's body without considering that. And like Susan said, every blood test is only a snapshot of how that blood is in that given moment. That particular piece of blood that they've taken out of you, the next bunch that comes along is going to maybe say something different. And it's the same with my muscle checking or my pulse taking. That's just good for that moment because we are a different person every time we get up in the morning. We have to navigate this. And I think this is, like you said, Philippa, everybody wants answers, they want solutions, and they want their symptoms fixed. And so they can just get on with their lives. But in actual fact, it isn't about that. It's about navigating. And it's a whole life lesson, really.
Yeah.
Actually, I can riff off of what June said because I really believe in that. And you've heard about the carrot and the stick, right? No, the carrot could be money for someone who wants to get that goal. Well, I think there's a carrot and a stick here. So if you have a conversation with a woman who's journeying through menopause, wherever phase they're in, look at the reward at the end. Now, the end could be years away, but there are so many rewards when you've journeyed through that midlife. I can rattle off a few, like no more periods. That's probably good. Woohoo. Wisdom. I actually honestly think we have more wisdom. Yay, women. You know, fewer mood swings, things are stable. You don't have all those hormone fluctuations. And you could focus on aging with intent, not just kind of getting through menopause. So there's so much kind of ahead. That journey ahead is pretty cool. And, I think that could also be kind of a motivator to say, hey, this is just a phase in your life. And yes, some symptoms are absolutely drop dead. If you can't sleep at night and you're up every hour and you have zero ability to think the next day and your life is catastrophic, you can't just whimsically say, oh, someday I'll be wise. No, you have to fix those symptoms. So I don't want to be too cavalier, but Tracy, it really is kind of coming back to a grounding perspective on this. Allow women to feel like they're not crazy when they have all these things going on, and then address all those individual components as they come along, but don't make them so big that they're just kind of got to have a test for that.
Well, this is back to the whole thing about respect for older women. And this is where culturally, sadly, our cultures have not done that. Other more ancient cultures have. And wise old women were respected. And I think if we can somehow work towards that, holistic in the whole sense of the word, environment, culture, your house, your food, your habits, and how your stress levels, of course, your cortisol and your adrenaline will affect all your other hormones. And it is about all the whole thing being looked at together. But if we could encourage women to think about themselves being the wise old crone, it's absolutely something to look forward to. But there's this message that, oh, you're done. You're no use anymore. Yeah, and it's so not true.
Yeah, I so agree with that. I'm getting close to 60 and I feel like I'm 20 years younger. I feel that I have this joie de vivre. I feel like there's excitement. And yes, there's going to be many hurdles along the way. Of course, it's called life. One thing I wanted to get back to is kind of the definitions, perimenopause, premenopause, postmenopause. And when I talk to many women, let's say they're my age or they're mid 60s, and they say, "Oh, menopause, that was years ago." I say, "Well, you're post-menopause till you die," and they're like, "Oh, really?" So finish menopause, you're a post-menopause. You can be 90, you're still post-menopause. So that word menopause can be a little bit of a misnomer sometimes, and I think that's where we can reclaim our journey, reclaim our wisdom, and be proud of what we're doing and what we've gone through, what we've navigated, and come out on top. And I think, that's a perfect segue back to Philippa, because getting movement in your day and being physically fit in a way that allows you to do things you want to do is of paramount importance, isn't it?
Well, it is because, I absolutely have that same feeling that you do, Dr. Susan, which is a feeling of like you've come out the other end and that there is a whole new world of possibilities. And, they talk about the fog of puberty and, those teenage hormones driving them crazy. And menopause was a lot like that for me. And so now the stability is really quite an opportunity, that those monthly fluctuations, that would disable me for, periods at a time. I don't have that anymore. And a whole load of optimism and positivity around a future that's full of possibilities. But what makes it so possible is knowing that at this stage of life, and I'm 55, 56 next birthday, so I know it's young, isn't it? Yeah, the fact that I can touch my toes without any difficulties. I'm not bragging here. It's just, this.
Be proud. No, be
Oh,
very
well,
proud. Come on.
thank you. But it takes work is the problem. And, I said only this week that we get away with our bodies, not even hardly noticing them for so long. And then you kind of start to creak a little and you start to become aware that your feet are getting further away. The top shelf is higher than you remember. And itching between your shoulder blades becomes a bit of a dance. So this is the time. This is the time we can move at this time of life and benefit more, if as much, if not more, than if we'd never done it ever before. So grasp the nettle is what I say. And really, take the bull by the horns. You were talking about, what was it? The wise woman, I'm going down kicking and screaming. That is what is happening for me. And I will be wise. Okay, I can be wise, but I'm definitely not going quietly. So, and this.
Well, we can say what we want. We actually give ourselves permission to say how we feel about stuff and just go, no, I'm not putting up with any nonsense. You're going to listen to me. And so, I feel like that's the wise old crone's job, is to say, look, come on, cut the crap.
Cut the crap with kindness.
Yes, exactly.
And that kindness starts with kindness to oneself. And I think that is hard to do for many younger, 20s, 30s, 40s, and however you want to expand that. Some women don't actually know that in their 60s or 70s. And I think you promote more of that kindness to yourself, then you can relax and share that wisdom. And, it's also taking away the shame, because some women have shame about, their different cultural aspects of menstrual periods or going through menopause or what it means to age. And so, we're just sharing our own personal, intimate experiences. But it really is, I come back to, if we can get the better dissemination of information, better access, and have women and men and everyone, families, understand what we have gone through or going through or will go through, it makes it a little bit easier. But really, it all comes back to how you process that in yourself. And it's a self journey. We come into this world alone. We leave this world alone. And if we could share that wisdom as we get older, I think that's really key.
That is really key. And this kindness to ourselves, we know that women are doing more than ever before. Working women raising families and still having to come home and cook the dinner and do the vacuuming on the weekends and, all the rest of it. And so finding time for yourself in that busy agenda can be a challenge. But what we know is that small things can make a big difference. And so find some little piece of time for you this weekend, even just begin to think, what is it that I would like this to feel like? Because if we have to start to understand what is it that we feel right now and what would we rather like to feel instead, perhaps, or as well as. So, spend some time daydreaming and come up with something that you would like to incorporate that may be new, or something old that you used to do. And if it's moving, all to the good, and short is fine. Keep it short, keep it manageable. Tag it on to something that you already do with whatever it is you want to change in your life. Think of something that you're going to do anyway, every day, and then tag it onto that. It might be every time you go to the car. It might be when you brush your teeth. It might be when you boil the kettle. And little things. Just make a change and suck it and see. Like the pick and mix. Try lots of different things, and eventually something will invariably stick. That is what I would say to you today. So I hope you ladies are in agreement. Thank you so much for your time this afternoon.
Oh, it's been lovely.
Thank you so much. Take care. Have a fabulous rest of your day and hang in there, everybody.